Thank you so much. I am really excited to be able to have a conversation today with attorney Dennis Verano. So thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Good to be here.
So you are located in New York, right?
I am.
All right. So as we kick off our time together today, I always like to ask, hey, what is one thing that you would want to make sure that women that are going through divorce know? And you've got, like a 30-second, PSA. What do you want to tell them?
Okay. So, despite everything you've heard, here's the thing: the hardest part with divorce is not the process itself, it's actually getting to the point where you have the confidence and the calm mentally to make that decision that divorce is the best option for you. That's the hardest part, not the process itself.
I would agree with that. Yes, what a great kickoff to our time together. So I know that when we had kind of our preliminary call, one of the things that I really appreciated about our conversation was talking about trends, things that you're seeing that are going on, and ways that women can, whether they're in New York or potentially in another state, right, that they could grab onto as far as things that they may want to be thinking about. So what is the one thing right now that you're seeing a lot of? Like you start, I know it kind of comes in waves probably, but what are some of the trends that you're seeing on your end?
I think most recently, let's say like the past 6 months, I'm seeing a lot more prenups and I'm also seeing a lot more mediation. And that wasn't
Mm,
always the case. I think historically, our law firm has done about, let's say, 95% litigation. And I would much prefer, the 95.5 be in the reverse.
yeah.
So I'm seeing people are getting it. People are seeing that you can navigate a really good resolution in your situation through the mediation process, or even planning for the what if in the form of a prenup.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So the prenup, right? I think, in years past, it was one of those things that was kind of taboo. Like you did it if you kind of wanted to, like there was hey, my family doesn't really want me to get married. They have concerns about, and so they,
Right. Right.
so so they're encouraging me right now. So talk, why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think you're seeing more of that?
I think that, well, there's a couple of different trends I think overall that you're seeing across the board is that fewer people are getting married. People are getting married later. And I think it's more of a practical, logical, pragmatic approach to marriage than it ever was. Okay. So I think people are saying, okay, let's be realistic. Let's be open and honest from the start. And I think really, if you look at it this way, you would be open and honest with your prospective spouse about everything else. So why not the finances? Why not the what if this happens? How are we going to treat each other? How are we going to navigate the process? So I think that's it.
Well, and I'm wondering too, like, in the states where it's equitable distribution, right? Not the marital property states, but the other
Right.
states, right? I guess from my perspective, having, we work all over the country, right? In the marital
Right.
property states, there's in some aspects it's simpler, but I think it would make it cleaner too. Like there's clarity, right, on exactly what was brought into the marriage. So when we as
Right.
CDFAs have to do the separate property
Right.
calculations, we fully transparent on know what we're talking about versus, oh, it's been 20 years and now we need to go back and find statements from 20 years ago on what that dollar value was, coming into the marriage.
Right, absolutely. And navigating those, we call them hybrids, navigating especially those hybrids of something's separate property, something's marital property, what percentage is what. And then you start talking about things like stocks that are going up and down through market forces. And then you're hiring experts to assist you in that. So I like to keep it simple. I really do. And I think and even just not set aside the finances, even from just a mental and emotional perspective, knowing that you're being honest with each other right at the outset.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that we've seen kind of, okay, so we've got the prenup, right, prior
Right.
to, but the other tool that we've been able to use in a couple situation is the postnup.
Right.
And so it's been, so talk to us a little bit about that because it's a situation where they got married, things had bubbled up. They weren't really sure that they wanted to get divorced, but they still needed to provide some clarity around, maybe it's inherited funds or maybe it's, whatever that they want to try to have some clarity around. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the postnup is in large part a nearly identical document to the prenup, really. And the point of both of those documents is to, while you're thinking more clearly, while there's fewer emotions involved in the process, have an honest and open conversation about what you want the ultimate result to be. And it's funny because we're getting more and more postnups lately, but at the end of the day, you're navigating postnups, and for one reason or other, people are not signing them, I think. And look, in a situation, we're suggesting postnups in a couple of different situations. If one, you wanted to get married, you had a date set, your guests invited, and then you're like, oh, well, we wanted to do a prenup, but we didn't get a chance to get around to do it. That's a good opportunity to do a postnup. Also, in those circumstances where you're trying to navigate through restoring the marital relationship, you're doing some marriage counseling, you're not quite sure if it's going to work, but you're going to give it a go. And in that circumstance, I think it's a really good idea to do a postnup, or at least consider it. And not the least of which is, when you're going through the marriage counseling, take the angst of the prospective financial issues that may crop up in the context of your divorce case. Take those out of the picture. And now you're just dealing with the emotions of the relationship if you can get your postnup hammered out.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, and being able to compartmentalize, which I think men are probably a little bit better at doing, but facilitating that, right, I think is really helpful.
Yes.
So I want to stick on this for just a minute, because I feel like the other thing that I would like to talk about is in these situations where again, I had my company exclusively with women, but the thing that I'm seeing is, hey, you know what? Yeah, it was 20 years ago, and it was the day before the marriage, and I felt pressured to have to sign this document, or, we're doing the postnup. Do we really have to disclose all the financials? And I think so what would you say to the person who's either considering a prenup, considering a postnup, right, to make sure that they're empowered before they sign on the line?
It's funny because I think, as you know, I do a lot of videos on TikTok, which have been overwhelmingly popular. I love that platform, by the way. If you haven't experienced that, I know at first I was like, TikTok, how really a divorce lawyer there? But it's been really good. And I find that when I do pieces on prenups and postnups, a lot of people are arguing about the level of enforceability. Well, it's not worth the paper it's written on. I get all the time. And what my response to them is, if it's properly negotiated and executed and signed, and when I say negotiated, I mean there's exchange of all the necessary financial information at the outset, they are extremely reliable, at least in New York State. So what I'm suggesting to somebody who's questioning, hey, should I do a prenup or not? I feel concerned about it. I'm stressed out about it. Ask for, and again, this is your starting point at the beginning of your marriage, before you get married, to be honest with each other. Be open and honest and forthright. Ask your prospective spouse to exchange the necessary financial information. Hire a lawyer of your choosing to review it with you. Appropriately negotiate out the language in that document so that you and your lawyer are comfortable with it. And then, and only then, execute that prenup. And here's what you get there. You get honesty at the outset. Presumably, it's one of the bigger steps to establishing trust between the two of you in your relationship. And number three, you walk away from that document feeling like, okay, I'm comfortable with this document. I signed it. I know exactly what I expect. And even if you sign the document and ultimately it says this person you're marrying has all this premarital separate property that's going to remain theirs in the event of a divorce, at least you know and you can plan. So ultimately, throughout the marriage, you're planning your own financial freedom and your own ability to be self-supporting and be financially successful throughout the marriage, and not just relying on one spouse or the other.
That's a really important point, right? Because I think what happens is, at least from what I've seen, women will sign those documents, right, and kind of almost like forget about them. And then life goes on, right? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, and they're in a really difficult position, right? Because they now have agreed to something that's way overarching, potentially, They
Right.
may be leaving that relationship with very little because they made a choice early on. And
Right.
I think the other part of it too, kind of like you alluded to, is as we see this trend in marriages shift and we have cohabitating, individuals who are cohabitating or purchasing houses together or doing things. I mean, I had a lady reach out, 20-year relationship. They weren't married. He had a business. They were doing their thing. They decided to part way. I mean, there was nothing in her name, not a thing.
Right. Right.
And I'm like, I don't
Right.
even know that I can help you at this point. Like, there's not a whole lot I can do because,
Right.
gosh, if you were married, this would be a different conversation.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think in those cases, that's another trend that we're seeing is we're getting more and more of these cohabitation sort of situations. And I say at the end of the day, and it surprises people, you would have been better off getting married and having a prenup at the outset.
Yep.
For a number of different reasons. And even not the least of which is keeping your lawyer bills down. I mean, who wants to have to hire a lawyer for a custody case and then a support case and then a civil case rather than one divorce case that if you had a prenup, it's pretty much open and shut.
Yeah. Well, and that's what gets tricky, right? Because they are two separate, cases, if you will. So then,
Right.
But the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. We've had a couple of those, and it's been kind of tricky, because they are, two separate. What do you want to say? Two separate. They're governed by two separate parts of the law. So it's just been really challenging. Well, and I think the other message too is, especially for the women that are going through divorce and they say, hey, Ron, I'm never getting married again. Okay. But they may end up living with somebody, or they may be joining their finances, or all the things. It's like, listen, ladies, let's get it together and get our stuff organized, have the documentation, right? So it's not like we're making poor decisions, just because we're not married. We can still really build in some of those things to make sure that you're protected.
Yes, I think absolutely. And that's the thing, and I get those responses all the time too. I'm never getting married again. And my retort is usually, okay, but if you do, make sure you have a prenup. So, and I think with the prenup, if you have these circumstances where people get married and one spouse is reliant on the financial resources of the other, and presumably they do a prenup, which protects those pre-existing financial resources to what let's say the moneyed spouse. That's a New York divorce lawyer phrase. At least if you're what we call the non-moneyed spouse, you are planning for your own financial future in these cases. I think with divorce, I think it puts every aspect of your life under a microscope, not the least of which is your financial health, your financial well-being.
Yeah.
In and of yourself, individually, separate and distinct from your spouse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's the area where we could be doing, right, podcast after podcast on the attitudes and the beliefs and the mindset that people are bringing to that relationship, right? And women may say, well, Rhonda, I was really independent. I handled all my finances. I paid, all the bills. I did all the things prior to getting married. And then, I kind of let him take over or whatever. And now I'm 20 years late. I'm like, but here's the thing. You've done it. You can do it. And even if you haven't done it, right, these are all things that can be learned. I mean, one of the things that I end up saying is, hey, financial confidence is the knowledge of knowing, the terminology and some of those things and the experience doing it. And if we have the knowledge without the experience, well, it's theory. And if we have the experience without the knowledge, it's trial and error. But when we get both of those working together, right, we really can be walking through like, hey, I know that terminology. Hey, I might not know everything about the money, but I know enough, right, to take that next step. And I'm surrounding myself with people that can help me through that. And I think the other part of it too, kind of to what you were talking about earlier, is for the people that don't have that experience, right, what ends up happening is they leave these situations feeling disempowered, feeling guilty, feeling shameful because they didn't ask the questions or they signed a document that they wish they wouldn't have signed. And so I think, I'm in alignment with, hey, get the documents in place, but also make sure that you've got the attorney to review it. Make sure that you fully understand all the pieces. If you don't, ask questions and get clarification on it before you sign.
Right. Absolutely. And it's not, and I think in these circumstances, it's not just about having the right divorce lawyer. I mean, I think, look, I think if you could, in my view of the world, in a perfect world, every divorce case should include a financial expert. It should include an accountant. It should include a counselor or a divorce coach, as well as a divorce lawyer. Now, not obviously good ones in each area,
Yep.
and not every person who's divorcing has the resources to afford that. Um, but I think just knowing that that's what would be useful in the circumstance, and then you can plug in the pieces that work for you. Say, hey, because I know, at least for me, like my accountant has been a huge influence, even just in my personal life. So that person in some ways has been advisor, confidant. So I think when you're going through this and you're becoming empowered and you're ready to take control of your own finances, independent of everyone else, having that person there or people, I think is super useful.
Well, and I think the one thing that you mentioned, right, is when you have this team, I think the paradigm is, oh, well, it's going to cost me more. But the thing that a lot of times people don't realize is if you don't have the right people, right, just because there may not be a whole lot to work with per se, right?
Right.
If people are going to fight, they're just going to fight, right? And so it means
Right.
more dollars, even though there isn't maybe, I mean, we've all had those situations where they're, fighting over the crystal bowl or the watering cans, or I mean, just stuff that doesn't even, it's like go buy a different one, right? Move on from
Right.
that. But sometimes they just get stuck in it. And so it's the fighting, right? The discrepancy between the parties is really what's fueling those, not necessarily having more team members there to advocate, because ultimately, right, we can save them time and money and energy when everybody's working together, right?
Right.
One of the things I did recently in a presentation was talking about you really have three separate divorces going on at the same time. You've got the emotional divorce, the financial divorce, and the legal divorce, and they're all kind of like swirling around, together. And I love that because I think ultimately when we do have the right people in those right spots, right, we're going to be able to have a more streamlined approach. The women that are reaching out, right, are going to feel supported. They're going to know what
Right.
questions to be asking. And it's a very different experience than trying to go at it alone. And
Right.
and that's, I think, when you and I had connected, that's what was so refreshing, is finding the people that get, hey, this is really a holistic approach, and we need to be able to have interdisciplinary actions to help people navigate through this. And I know that that's not everybody's philosophy.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I want to do just what I'm good at, right? I'm an experienced divorce litigation, divorce mediator. That's my job. I don't want to be your financial expert, and I'm not qualified to be. I don't want to be your accountant, and I'm not qualified to be. And I don't want to be your counselor or your divorce coach either. But and I do think there's a distinct value to each and every one of those roles. And I think people are always looking at $5,000 today, $2,000 today, $10,000 today. And what I try to get clients to see is I'm not concerned about as much the today, tomorrow, and the next day as I am about the 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road. And I think with the right team in place at the outset, it may seem like it's slightly more expensive, but actually, to the contrary, it is more efficient, it is more effective, and especially in the long term, in the long run.
Well, and that's the thing that's so, I think really important for us to just pause on for just a minute, because the stats are showing us, particularly for women, that their standard of living after divorce goes down by 41%.
Right.
So we ask, right, why is that? Well, I think there's a couple things, right? They're either feeling bullied to make a decision, they don't fully understand the scope of all of their options, and they don't have a team that's saying, listen, on paper, this looks great. We've split it down the middle, we're good to go, and we're moving on, right? And it's like, well, wait a minute though. How is this actually going to be impacting them
Right.
after this transaction is over? And I think for you as an attorney to be able to lift your head up and look beyond the property division and the final divorce agreement is awesome, because I don't think that there's, from my experience, right, and talking with a lot of attorneys, that are actually willing to look out
Right.
the horizon a little bit, saying, hey, yeah, these decisions are going to impact you beyond just today.
Right. Right. I can think of an example of a situation where, and it wasn't our client, it was the person on the other side, but They wanted to get the cash out of a rental property over time, but didn't have the ability to make the money. So I'm like, but that rental property is going to give you positive tax implications, and it's going to generate income for you, and it's going to help establish your credit, and it's going to be an asset you can borrow against, et cetera. All of these things. And I think sometimes it's the role of the lawyer at least to suggest it. Maybe you're not necessarily being the guide through that process. The financial expert is, or the accountant is. But at least know enough to say, hey, you may want to rethink this and talk with somebody that can assist you with your finances post-divorce as to whether or not this is a good idea for you in the long run.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think sometimes people, right, underestimate all of the things that go into this process, right? All of the
Yes,
decisions that are going to need to be made. Because you alluded to this earlier, like they're literally going to be looking under the hood of every single thing about your life.
absolutely.
And the finances are just one part of that piece, you know, and
Yes,
it's really, really um again, making sure that you've got as much information and a process and a strategy is important. Because again, you know, we could go on, our clients, right, could go on, they could Google stuff, they could take things out of context, and it's just overwhelming. And so then what happens is we've just got this whole cluster of all these moving parts and not a cohesive strategy to say, okay, if you take this, you know, what's that going to look or in lieu of this, right? So again,
right.
it's always a bit, and there's more, like, let's be real, there's more than one way that things can be split. There's more than one way, right, that we can come to an agreement. But I think it's, again, going into it with eyes wide open, having the knowledge, being able to ask the right questions so you get the right answers, and ultimately at that point, right, people are making an informed decision. I mean, one of the
Right.
things that somebody had mentioned recently that just really was like, really fired me up was there was an attorney who was a mediator who said, well, you know, it's up to the individual if they decide to take a bad deal. And I was like, well, time out here, because if the parties, right, have received some guidance, right, around potentially
Right.
the options or whatever, is it actually even possible, if they have all the information and make an informed decision that we might not agree with, but they make an informed decision, are they actually accepting a bad deal?
Right. Right.
I mean, if they're making the best decision for them based on all and have all the information, are they actually accepting a bad deal? I don't think so. But the problem is we don't go that extra effort to make sure that they have all the information.
Right.
And then we say,
Right.
well, hands off if they accept a bad deal. No, 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 no,
Right.
no.
Right. I mean, I think, look, you need to take a look at these cases comprehensively. And I think if you've handled them for a long period of time and a high volume, at least to the extent, I mean, I know that for me, that's true. Presumably, you're trying to hone your craft and get better and better at it. I mean, for me, the amount of information that I ask from my client and from the other side at the outset seems like a mountain of information. I mean, the scariest thing I could put in front of my clients seemingly on average is the net worth statement, but I love it. It's such an incredibly useful tool. And if it's filled out well, if it's completed comprehensively, it's your Bible for the divorce process.
Yep.
It's everything you need for the finances. I say everything, but obviously I'm overgeneralizing. It's the biggest, most important piece of the divorce process. And I think if that document is completed by both parties the way it should be, honestly and comprehensively, you can use those documents to help you get through the process. But it's a lot of information at the outset, but that gets you on the path to get a fair resolution.
Well, and that's an important part, right? Because I'm actually working on another presentation on the discovery component, right? And I think a
Right.
lot of times people will start and they'll wait. I see it as like, listen, it's go time, right? We need to get that information as soon as we can in the beginning, because the longer that time goes on, the more opportunities there are and more difficult sometimes to get information.
Can I just stop you right there and thank you for saying that? Because I feel like I'm the only guy out there, or gal for that matter, that's saying, I need your net worth statement filled out well at the outset. That's the first document I ask for, and all the supporting information to that. Now, obviously, the discovery process goes on from there. But if you start there and don't wait till 6 months, a year into the process to fill out that document at the outset, right away.
Yep. It's huge. And I think for the women that are listening, right? If you have anxiety about this conversation, this is part of what we do, right? Is if you're working with an attorney, we're in the trenches. We're rolling up our sleeves. We're on a Zoom session. We're helping you walk through what is it that you need. Okay, let's help you point you in the right direction on where to look for those statements.
Right.
All of those things, right? Because again, it can be overwhelming and we are able
Yep.
to do a little more hand holding through the process and walk step by step through that, right? So again, there's times when our clients will have all of that information done before they even file. And the attorney's like, oh my gosh. I'm like,
Right.
listen, because we've spent time working on it.
Right. Absolutely. And listen, we get that too. We have the clients that will have them
Right?
filled out to the penny, everything filled out to the penny with statements attached and everything super organized. And then you have the person that doesn't even know. But I even say, look, and I have it. So when we first send the net worth statement, we've been doing this for years, but now our revised engagement letter says, relax. Literally, it says like, relax. I know this can seem like it's a daunting task. I know we're asking for a lot right out of the gate, but please just be patient with the process. If you have any questions or problems, always call the office. The paralegals are there to help. So just try to like, because I know as soon as they see that like 14, 15, 16, whatever page document is, like, oh my God, for the people that aren't like super organized and super like, finance people. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, it certainly can be overwhelming, but I think the other thing that we've been able to do to help our clients is say, okay, listen, this is an opportunity for you to play like the private investigator role. Like, I just want you to start being aware, like, oh, look in the recycling bin, look at these statements, or, oh, look at this email that came in, right? And so it takes some of that pressure off to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to know everything. It's like, just be aware,
right.
right?
Absolutely.
As part of the oh, look at what it's more of like from a curiosity standpoint, like, oh, isn't that interesting? Look, there was a statement that came in from Fidelity. What could that be?
Right, right. And I love that you use the word investigation because I always say, look, there are several layers of investigation to ferret out any issues in a financial issues in a divorce case. The first layer is for you to fill out the net worth statement, yours. The second layer is to get a net worth statement from them, obviously with the attached financial documents. Third layer, and this is the layers of investigation. So my advice to my clients is, they're like, well, when should I sign this document? When should I feel comfortable and confident that I know everything about my case? I can't necessarily answer that unequivocally for you, but I think for most clients, go through the layers of investigation. Some people say, I know everything. I've got my net worth statement filled out. I know all the finances. I'm great. Good. Then that's you. And that's fantastic. Some people say, well, I need their net worth statement. Then maybe the next layer is some investigation, some exchange of documents, reaching out to the banks or the financial institutions to get statements directly. Then maybe a forensic accountant. So there's a lot of different layers of investigation. Yeah. So I love the use of that word there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is such an important part of this process. I mean, if we don't have that information in the beginning, like you said, right, how can we have an accurate negotiation if we don't have all of the information? The one other thing that I think is really important as part of that is also one of the things that we do is help them with a budget, right? And I always say, listen, this isn't sexy, it isn't glamorous, but if we know what's coming in current and we can do a projected, right? Now we're going to be able to help answer the support questions, do I need to go back to work questions? How much can I afford for a house? Do I need to rent? Like all the things, right? And so it's interesting though, because as part of that, right? So that's that's obviously different than the net worth statement. But I think for women, right, it's been super helpful to give them that freedom to say, okay, here, and then I can help them, right, with asking the right questions and making sure that, hey, here's the range. Worst case scenario, right? Here's the minimum that you need to walk away with in support to pay your bills. Right. Versus, hey, here's an offer and a proposal. Will you accept it? And women are like, I don't know. Should I accept it? I'm like, well, if we've done the work, right, we can answer that question. Right. If they're coming to me in the middle and they say, hey, Rhonda, can I accept? I don't know. Like, we got to do some work here. We got to roll up our sleeves and get some stuff done. And then we can answer that question. And I think that's a really important part on our end. I always tell people, like, listen, I'm willing to condense the timelines, but I'm not willing to shortcut the process. And for us, just like the net worth statement is for you, the budget is one of those things. It's foundational. It's a building block for us to be able to answer all of the other questions along the way.
Absolutely. And I'm totally with you. Those things cannot be compromised. They're an absolute must to get to the
Yes.
end game. That's a long lasting, reasonable resolution for the client. And I think, and honestly, that's in many ways. So I get a lot of situations where there's a what I call moneyed spouse, a person that makes most of the money, and the other person that does other things in the relationship. Maybe takes care of the kids, maybe takes care of the household, maybe maybe manages the finances, maybe a combination of all three of those things. And in those sorts of circumstances, the non-moneyed spouse, what I'm seeking for them at the outset more than anything else is financial empowerment. So what does that look like? How do we get there? I think the starting point to the financial empowerment is you knowing what your lifestyle costs, what you need to live, what do you want out of life, and even just from a financial standpoint, for you and the kids, what does it cost for cable? What does it cost for your gas? What's food look like? And then once you can sort out the what your budget is, and you juxtapose that against what support entitlement you might have, now it's your time to decide what's your next step. What do you want to be? What do you want to do for a living? Do you want to go for an advanced degree? Do you want to look at something different? Do you want to change careers? I mean, but I think the first step is to understand what it takes you to live from a financial perspective. And some people know that to the penny, and some people do not.
Well, and I think that's an important part of it, right? Because once we have that information, then what happens is we say, okay, well, there's a gap, right? Potentially there's a gap. So now what?
Right.
And so that's again where we can come in to say, hey, listen, either A, you got to cut expenses, which I'm not always a big fan of, just for the record. Like I always feel like, hey, let's figure out a way to make more money, right? What could that look like? Could you go get a part-time job? Could you, what are we doing here? Now, the other thing that we've been able to help our clients with is go back, and if they are working, negotiate for a raise. And so we teach women how to do that. They go back 100% of the time. It's been working, even in those situations where women will say, gosh, my company said they're not giving raises. I'm like, that's fine. We're still going to ask, because if they don't honor the fact that you need a couple bucks more an hour, guess what? You're going to have to leave and go find something else. They're going to have to hire and replace you. Right. And if we can position this in the best way possible, like, hey, listen, I'm committed to this company. Right. But here's where I'm at. And here's why I have brought value to the company and all those things. And it's worked. Right. And so people can stay and they can make a little bit more money where they're at, not having to change jobs or do all those things, and close the gap. But like to your point, sometimes it's not just one thing. It might be, hey, I need to negotiate a salary. Maybe I need to get a side hustle. Maybe I need to, start a business. Maybe I need to whatever. Right. And so it really becomes an empowering thing for women to, like you said, have those choices.
I absolutely love what you just said. I can't even stand it. I think I might be, no, honestly, I think I might be the only other person, and maybe I'm, who says that. I think we're always so caught up on cut your expenses. We're caught up in, well, you can clip coupons. Well, you can do this. Well, you can do that. You would be surprised if you make the effort, how you can bring the money that comes in the door up, rather than having to cut the money that goes out the door necessarily. Now, that doesn't mean you spend willy-nilly. Maybe you do take a look at what your overhead is. But people always think they can't. It's so hard to make more money. It's not as hard as you think if you just try.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think the other part too that I, of course, see, right, is, okay, so the women are the ones who say, listen, I'm going to cut expenses. I'm going to be frugal. They're fine, right? There's some aspect of that, yes. But at the same time, if we look at the spouse's balance sheet and their budget, first of all, nobody is going through that with a fine-tooth comb and saying, hey, do you need to get your nails done? Hey, why are you getting your hair done? Oh, you bought a Porsche that's now at least for $900 a month. Nobody's calling him on the carpet on his expenses. And yet women are over here taking it to say, yeah, I'll do whatever and I'll sacrifice. No, your intention is to live a lifestyle similar to what you were. And that means you too. Like, well, can I go on vacation? I'm like, we're putting something in the vacation fund, God darn it.
Absolutely. And there's supposed to be, listen, when you look at that net worth statement, like I mentioned earlier, there is a section that says vacations.
That's right.
If they didn't anticipate that you would take yearly vacations, they wouldn't have put it in there. Believe me. It's
I
now
love this.
it's funny because I had a case many years ago that we hired a financial expert to do what we call a lifestyle analysis for our client. Now there were some complex financial issues involved there, but that person was worth their weight in gold. So to your point about setting up a budget, this person was able to say, "Hey, Mr. Vetrano and client, you need X amount of dollars a month to continue to live the way that you live. And if
Yep.
you get more than that, fantastic. Then you put it in a savings account."
That's right. That's right. And I love doing that because again, when we go into those conversations, whether it's one-on-one with a client or part of a mediation, sometimes people bring us in as the experts. It's part of that team. We can have a conversation with our clients and I
Ooh,
know
that's
the
a good idea.
numbers.
That's a good idea. I like that idea.
Oh, it's been awesome. Like we've been able to really, and I love doing that. Like I love attorney mediated mediations where I'm with the client, my client and the attorney. So when they come back with the proposals, I've done my homework. I'm like, okay, listen. And normally what ends up happening is we get more than what the women need.
Yeah. Oh my
So
God. That's so
then,
good. I love that.
so then they can take that difference, right? And they can save.
Right.
Oh, what a concept, Rhonda. Like I don't have
Right.
to just like barely break even.
Right.
No, you
Right.
don't.
Right.
And do I think that they're getting better settlements than if they went to trial? I do. Do I think are we still skewing the numbers beyond what is, appropriate within the particular state that they're working? No, but we're moving the needle from, skewed one direction to center where it
Right.
probably should have been in the first place, but we're not starting there as much as people want to say that we are. We're not starting there. And
Right.
so we've got to fight to be able to do that. And it's worked. It's really worked.
Right.
And we've been able to help women meet their goals financially, whether it's keeping the house, even if they haven't been working, right? So we structure that in a way that they're able to keep the house. And again, there's all those pieces, right? We got to make sure that there's a seasoning for the mortgage, but a 6-month period. So we get that money coming in so it can count
Right.
as income, all the pieces, right? But we've been able to help them meet their goals. And it's just awesome. And that's really where the reward happens, right? When you see that you're making a difference in the lives of people beyond, just the interaction that we have with them.
Yeah. And I will tell you, to your point, I can tell you I've been in litigation closing in on almost 23 years now. And I think over the past 7 or so cases, we've done literally thousands of divorces, or 7 or so years, excuse me. We've done thousands of divorces. I can tell you, if you think that you're just going to go straight to litigation and that's going to get you what you're looking for, it really should be a last resort if you have no other choice. But I think it's less and less likely the longer I practice. And although we are capable of using all of our lawyerly tools to get a good result, I will tell you in these cases, generally the judges don't have the time. Many of the judges are not really divorce specific judges and were never divorce specific lawyers, and they're not really offered any extensive divorce specific training. So now you're putting that issue before a judge who's got 250, 500 other cases going on.
Who doesn't care?
They've got 5 minutes to listen to your case, and at its worst, the judge doesn't even care. And I think you're right about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges. And I think to your point, one of the things that you had mentioned, and then we'll kind of wrap it up, but the one thing that I like that you mentioned was, listen, we need to be committed, right, to the people that are going through this process, right? Because the process in and of itself, in my opinion, is broken. So if we can be committed to help the people, right, get through a broken system,
right,
they're going to be a lot better off. And I love it. I love the conversation we've had. I think we're going to have to probably do a part 2 at some point, because
absolutely.
We're addressing all the things that
we are.
Fire me up, which is awesome. So first of all, I want to thank you so much for sharing your being candid and having a candid conversation around, the things that you're seeing. As we wrap up our time, any final comments or thoughts to the women that are listening?
Well, let me leave you with a couple of things. Let me leave you with a quote, if you wouldn't mind. I think the divorce is not an end point. It's a starting point. And that's the way I look at it for clients. I think it's a turn of a page in your life. Okay. Yeah. And I think there's a few things to keep in mind with the divorce process. Be patient, be reasonable. Keep the lines of communication open so that you can try to navigate through this without having to put everything before a judge. And at the end of the day, don't feel intimidated or guilty about insisting on what's fair. And if you have the right people around you, you'll know what's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, this has been a great conversation. I know that those that are listening have really enjoyed our banter back and forth, and I've gotten a lot of really great nuggets out of our time together. So I want to thank you for your time today. And don't forget to check out Dennis's contact information in our show notes today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it was a pleasure. It was a great conversation.